I thank Maggie for her speech and now look to Dr. Wanda Wyporska to continue the case for the opposition.
Again, what a hard act to follow. And I would suggest, in the unlikely event that Maggie's ever out of work, she contact Marvel to write a new script for their next films. There's clearly some good ideas there. I too am honoured to be here. I'm standing in the very same hall where some of my true heroes have stood and spoken. I was lucky enough to see Toni Morrison here many years ago, and I know that Angela Davis has stood here as well. And I count myself honoured to stand in the same spot as those heroes. And I salute everybody who's also brought their struggle to this very hall. It's also apposite that I'm speaking after Claire talking about the environmental crisis and before Richard, who will be talking about the economic crisis, because that underlines the absolute intricate balance between inequality, the environment, and the economy. Because the economy and the environment are driving inequality, and inequality is driving the environmental problems and the economic problems. Around the world, we're facing economic and environmental disaster, as you've heard, all in the pursuit of economic growth. This growth squeezes workers. This growth takes away holiday pay and sick pay. This growth ensures that more profit is diverted to shareholders in dividends at the cost of workers. The share of profit that goes to labour or to the workers is now far lower than it has been for decades. All of this so that the rich can grow richer. The results are plain to see. The results of inequality are here on our streets. A fifth of those in working households are below the levels of relative poverty. As Josh has mentioned, there are 4.1 million children living in poverty. And I add the 0.1 because that's another 100,000 children that are in poverty, let's not forget that. And that's set to rise to 5.2 million children by 2022. And when we look at BME children, 45% of them are likely to live in a poor household, when compared to 26% of their white counterparts. We have record numbers of food parcels being given out here in the UK, one of the world's richest economies. And we see homelessness everywhere we go. We see it on the streets of Oxford and other cities. What you don't see is the sofa surfing. What you don't see are children trying to do their homework in poor and cramped accommodation with mould on the walls, in rooms where they're sharing with many siblings. What hope do they have in this next decade? If you haven't seen it already, I would urge you to see Ken Loach's latest film. Never a cheery thing, you might prefer Marvel instead. At least you know the good guys are going to win there. But his film, Sorry We Missed You, shows the absolute devastation that's wreaked on parents and families up and down the country as they're working in the gig economy, devoid of any dignity, trying to keep their families together, trying to put food on the table, working in jobs that the Victorians would have been devastated to see, where they have no holiday pay, they have no sickness pay, and where they're at the mercy of bosses who can do what they like in insecure jobs. They don't know if they're going to have hours. They don't know if they're going to be able to pay the rent. And the effect you see on this film, on their family life, the effect on their children, the effect on all of their family is devastating. And the costs to our mental health cannot be underestimated. We've seen report after report tell us that there's a rise in mental ill health, especially among our young people. We see rising levels of violent crime on our streets. We see rising levels of infant mortality. And these levels of infant mortality are directly related to socioeconomic status. Put quite frankly, if you're poorer, you're more likely to see your baby die. And we see status anxiety, the need to show people our worth through consuming and buying greater goods. It doesn't make us any happier for much longer. We are a nation of have-yots and have-nots. This is tearing apart the fabric of our society. And the reason that income inequality is such an important issue is because it affects all of us. it doesn't just affect people at the bottom, although clearly it affects them more, but it affects people at the top as well. Inequality in all its forms is like a cancer in our society. The Equality Trust released a report before Christmas showing that in the UK, 6 billionaires control more wealth than 13 million people. We have 14 million people in poverty. The Sunday Times Rich List. We found that the Sunday Times Rich List 1000 had increased their wealth over the last 5 years by £253 billion. So when Theresa May said that she couldn't find a magic money tree to give our public servants more of a pay rise, she wasn't looking in the right place. Now perhaps the symbol at the moment as we sit here is on that mountain in Davos, in Switzerland, where we see the rich men flying in their private jets, and there's probably no more iconic symbol of the link between inequality and climate change than those private jets. They are the beneficiaries of this broken system. The system that was created off the back of slaves, some of my ancestors, and the back of oppressing women. And Oxfam's latest report shows that 22 billionaires have more wealth than all the women in Africa. They've created a bastion of power, not just financial power, not just economic power, political power, legal power as well. And that's going some way to create the problems that mean that we fail to tackle climate change and we fail to take it seriously. Turkeys do not vote for Christmas or Thanksgiving. And it's really important to tackle inequality, not just from the moral case, but also because we know that the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, the CBI, hardly bastions of, socialist revolution, have all said that income inequality causes sluggish growth, if you believe in growth beyond planetary boundaries. But what's more important is the effect that inequality has on our society. In countries with high levels of inequality, we also see higher levels of poor mental health, poor physical health. We see higher levels of infant mortality, of teenage obesity, of teenage pregnancy and of obesity. We see lower levels of educational attainment, and we see lower levels of trust, which I would argue goes some way to the state of what we call democracy today. We cannot ignore this, but we cannot also ignore the intersections of inequality that are contributing to this. We cannot ignore the fact that, noble as many of our struggles have been, we have not, as one speaker have already said, the job is not done. We are not in a post-racial society. Yes, we have same-sex marriage, we have equal marriage, we have a range of different rights, but we don't have necessarily that same attitudinal change. We have a gender pay gap, we have a disability pay gap, we have a class pay gap, because this is the UK, so obviously we do. And that means we have to look at those issues of discrimination and how they impact not only in our everyday lives, but also on our position in the labour market and where we are when it comes to health inequalities. And perhaps one of the most striking issues of inequality is health inequality. The richer people will have up to 19 years more of healthy life expectancy. And this underlines the key importance of tackling inequality. And this is why I don't have hope for the decade. We have the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 10 that says that all governments have committed to and signed up to tackle inequality, amongst other things. We have numerous treaties. We have numerous governments saying they're going to do something, but we still have these deep and ever-rising levels of inequality, and it's getting worse. We have a huge job to do. We have to shift power. We have to dismantle the system. We have to get those turkeys to vote for Christmas. And I'm afraid, as a historian, I can't see us doing that in this decade. I do not have the hope for this decade. We can mobilise, and we will fight, and we will take action. And I would urge you to vote against this motion, because we cannot do this in this decade. However, if you feel that you might feel hope in the next decade, then I would also urge you to vote for this motion. Don't restrict yourself to this decade. Thank you.